Hello and welcome to Fine is a Four-Letter Word. In this episode, I am talking to Dan Clouser.
Looking forward to
Excited
the
to have you
conversation.
here. Thanks for
having me
joining
on the
me
show,
today,
Lori.
Dan. Yeah, so am I. So this season has been focused on sabbaticals and people who've taken sabbaticals and how they've managed to do that. And you are still, I did a 1 month road trip. You are extending that to, I don't know if it's extreme. I don't know that I would call it extreme levels, but you took it you took it next level for sure on the road trip. So I'm
Absolutely.
eager to
Looking
get
forward
into
to it.
that story. Yeah, let's start out with the question that I love asking all of my guests because I'm just so curious. What were the beliefs and values that you were raised with that contributed to making you who you
I think the
became
biggest
as a
thing for
young
me
adult?
was just being, instilled with a desire to give back and a desire to volunteer and give of myself. My mom was always very giving. She was always volunteering at something, whether it was Meals on Wheels or helping at the Little League concession stand, helping, whatever local organization needed it. She was always there to help. My dad, on the other hand, his job was an over-the-road truck driver, so he didn't have as much time to give because he was always out and on the road. But he was always very willing to give financially. So, if there was an organization or a church that needed a donation, he was very willing to write a check and help out in that way because he couldn't give of his time. And I think that's something that just really instilled in me as a young man and just carried on through my adulthood was to want to give back and volunteer and give of myself in any way that I could.
Did those values contribute to
Yeah,
your
so
career decision?
founded and ran a nonprofit youth sports organization for 30 years. So yeah, it definitely, really even unknowing to me, greatly affected that decision. And for the first 20 years of that organization, it was volunteer. It was all volunteer. I was still working, a regular job in sales and, was working in the building materials industry. But on a weekend, I was volunteering for the organization. And then the organization grew so, to a point where it was so large where we needed to hire staff. And at that point, I decided to leave my career and become the first full-time staff member of the organization. So, yeah, that, like I said, it was just something that was instilled in me, and it was something that, even though we were a nonprofit youth sports organization, giving back was a big part of something that we instilled in our players as well, where we always got them involved in giving to other organizations and helping out, because I understood how that affected me as a young man, having it instilled into me as a child, that it just felt natural as I grew up to give back. So I knew firsthand what that meant to get kids involved in giving back and get kids involved in, wanting to help others.
Very cool. Yeah. And so what happened? You said you ran that organization for 30
The
years.
organization's
What
still
happened?
going. It's
Is it still
different
going?
than what it was. It's not as hands-on as what it was when I was there. It's really now a scholarship organization to help underserved youth participate in sports. So it is still living on today, just not exactly the way it was when I was directly involved.
What caused you or what
So
inspired you to walk away from it? Or I don't know that you
yeah,
walked away, to
it's
step away.
it's a funny story because if you would have talked to me in 2018, I'd tell you that I would die there. Literally that I'd probably never retire. I would die doing something for the organization. And then 2019, I took 2 solo road trips that year, early that year. One right around the first of the year, I drove to Dallas to the American Baseball Coaches Association conference, and on my way back, instead of going directly from Dallas back to Pennsylvania, I went down through Louisiana, got together with some friends of mine that we did some softball camps with down there up at the complex that we were in Pennsylvania, and went back to Pennsylvania. A few months later, I did a similar thing on the to Orlando, Florida. Again, somebody we were working with doing some soccer camps at our complex that upcoming year. Went down to meet with them, and both those trips, it was really the first time in my life where I took my time and enjoyed the journey. We traveled a lot as an organization, but it was always very regimented. We had a very strict schedule. We're traveling with anywhere from 20 to 70 teenage kids in tow, so we've got sometimes one bus. No doubt, no doubt. So
things need to
sometimes
be
it's
in
one
order
busload
there.
of kids, sometimes it's three busloads of kids. So it was very regimented, very structured how we traveled. So I never really had much time to enjoy the journey, so to speak. And those two trips in 2019, I really enjoyed the journey. I took my time. On the way to Dallas, I stopped in Memphis, spent a day in Memphis. On the way to Orlando, I stopped in Atlanta to see one of my old players, spent a day with him. And, on the way back, I got off at 95, took some different routes, and just enjoyed the journey. And at the end of those two trips, I had written like I hadn't written before. I had published a book in 2012. I was in the process of adding some chapters to it at that time, but it was very, very difficult for me to write just because of the time that I was putting in at the organization. I mean, in season, for me to put 90 to 100 hours a weekend was not beyond the realm of possibility. In the off season, in the winter, what's that? A week.
Wait, a weekend?
Yeah, 90
A
to
week. In the week? Did you say weekend?
No, not in a weekend. In a
I'm
week.
like, there aren't
In a
90
week.
hours in a weekend. Okay.
With many of them,
Okay. All right.
yeah, many
Still,
of them would be
I'll
on the
bear-
weekend.
that is a
though,
lot.
because we would run youth tournaments. So for me to work, Friday from 8 a.m. till midnight, go home, be back at the complex by 5:30 in the morning, and be there Saturday. And then on Sunday, be back at 5:30 in the morning and be there till our last championship game ended, which was usually 9:30, 10 o'clock in the evening. That was a very common schedule of mine. So yeah, out of those 90 to 100, a lot of them came in a 3-day span: Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Yeah, it was.
That is
I
insanity.
did that for
Jeez.
to that
And you
scale.
did that for how many years?
10
That's
years when I
crazy.
was full time, really. But
Wow. So,
yeah,
of course, no
yeah,
wonder
it
you
was-
had
and,
no time to
I would
write. You had no
justify
time
it
to
by the
think.
fact that we were doing incredible work. We were helping kids. And I saw many of those seeds blossom. Kids would come back to the organization when they were adults, and we would see the impact that we had on our on their lives as an organization. So I would use that as justification to literally, grind myself down to next to nothing. So
Right. Because
Right,
you're doing it
right.
for a
Put
good
that on the back
cause.
burner 'cause
So
I'm
never
helping all these
mind
other
my
people,
own well-being.
And yeah, so to write was very difficult with that, with that type of workload. And look, I also want to, full disclaimer here, like it was by choice. It wasn't like my board was saying, look, you got to put in these hours. It was really my choice because I did love what I did. But again, there was kind of this, weird justification of why I was doing it.
Yeah, I think far more often people do this to themselves, not an outside source. Even when you're working for somebody else, like a board or a boss in a corporate job, it's our
no
own
doubt, no doubt.
drive. We're doing this.
So
to
when I got back from
ourselves.
this trip, man, I wrote like I hadn't written in years. And there really was kind of now like this voice in my head saying, you know what, it's time to turn the page. It's time for a new chapter in your life. And it was really, God's way of speaking to me, saying, okay, it's, you've done enough here. It's time to move on. And, just to give a little background about those trips as well is, going back to my mother, She did a similar thing in the 80s where she took an old 1967 Plymouth Valiant, took the back seat out of it, put a sheet of plywood in there and a mattress, and kind of turned it into a quasi-RV. And, traveled around the country and did a ton of volunteer work, connected with friends and family, and just really lived life to the fullest. And, the other thing on those trips, I think I had kind of this aha moment as to, wow, I think I figured out why Mom did this. Like, we would have conversations when she was still around, but I never really asked her some of the deep questions as to why she had done it. And it kind of hit me then, and again, taking the time, because I know I did a leg with her from Pennsylvania to Florida when I was still in high school, and we never saw an interstate. We were always on some back secondary road. And she took the time to enjoy it. So that was working in my mind, and I loved telling people her story. Never at that time in my life would I've envisioned it to be, following in her footsteps, so to speak, be part of my story. But this was all kind of happening at the same time now in early 2019, where I'm writing more, and I'm hearing this voice tell me that it's time to, start a new chapter. And I got to be honest with you, I did not embrace it. At that point, I'm 50 years old. I've been with this organization for 30 years. I started the organization, so literally 60% of my life, when you break it down, 60% of my life on Earth was giving to this organization and building this organization. And, I was like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to walk away, but I did. As I kept listening, I understood that it was time to turn a page and that I could actually impact more people through writing more and publishing more books and doing a blog and doing some more speaking engagements and stuff like that. And after a while, I bought in and finally told my wife that it was something I wanted to do, and she thought I was crazy initially, and then.
Of course.
She was also going through some of her own trials and tribulations with her employer, where she had worked for a corporation that had laid her off after 23 years. They were bought out by another corporation, and then she, was now working for, a different corporation that was supposed to be a temporary to full-time position, and we were going on 2 years, and every time she'd have the conversation about, when am I going to be moved to full-time, it would be sidestepped, or there was a hiring freeze, or something was going on. And one day, she came home after one of those conversations with her superior, and just looked at me and said, "Okay, I'm in. What are we going to do? Let's sell everything and get this RV like you want, and let's see where it takes us." And from that point on, we put plans in motion. I let my board know that I'd be leaving at the end of the year, and now here we are almost 3 years in, and really loving every minute of it, and getting to revisit some of my old players who are scattered throughout the country, which again is just a, kind of a affirmation of the seeds we planted through that organization, and seeing these, young men and women grow up to be incredible human beings. And, I've since I republished that book I was working on, I've published another book, and I've got a children's book coming out at the end of March here, and two other books in the works. So I've definitely been able to write, without a doubt.
The floodgates have been opened. Back up to when you first started hearing that voice that it was time to leave this nonprofit organization that you had founded and built, and you didn't want to hear, because you didn't want to have to take that step that seemed so crazy and scary, which happens to a lot of people. They hear their inner voice telling them to do something that sounds so outrageous. They're like, no, that can't be right. I know I'm hearing this, but that's just like some crazy voice talking to me. And they don't listen. So how long were you hearing this before you said,
it was a couple months
I need to
went
actually
back and
do
forth,
this.
in my own mind before I even brought it up to my wife at all. So I want to say a good,
Mm-hmm.
2 to maybe 3 months where I just kind of battled back and forth. And again, I mean, the organization was my baby, so it was tough. It was tough to see, to be willing to walk away
Yeah.
from something that you had built and something you put so much time into, even if that time was probably, slowly killing me. I mean, to be right down to it.
Yeah. Well, and I would imagine because when I had my first business and I ran that for 11 years and ended up shutting it down, you may have had similar
Yeah.
feelings. Tell me if you did, that was your identity. Like
Yes.
if you walk away
Absolutely.
from that,
Absolutely. That is
who are you now?
absolutely the conversation I was having. And I think if there's a lesson to be learned, similar to what you said, is like, for people listening, like if you listen, if you hear that inner voice, um, you know, listen to it and act on it, regardless how tough it is, and regardless how old you are. Like, you're never too late. You're never too old to make that change. I mean, my mom did what she did in her mid 40s. She was working very successfully selling life insurance for a company
Mm-hmm.
called Life of Georgia at the time, making good money, and she listened to that inner voice, and she walked away from that. So it doesn't really matter how old you are, where you're at in life. You can make that change, and even if you think you're happy, because I thought I was happy, and I was. I wasn't unhappy by any stretch of the imagination. Everything was fine. That's absolutely right.
Sure. Everything was
But it was
fine.
fine at a very heavy expense on my stress level and my well-being, which again
Mm-hmm.
I would sidestep because of the work we were doing for the kids. But you can't fall into that trap, and
Yeah.
you've got to take that time for yourself. And you know now with what I'm doing with the writing and feedback I get, from a podcast episode that goes out, or somebody that comes up to me after speaking, or somebody that reads one of my blogs, or purchases a book and then emails me. It's to understand what I'm doing now through that work is very impactful as well.
Yes, I can totally see that. And I will offer that you were probably a quick listener if you were only going back and forth with this, not to minimize the struggle but for 2 or 3 months, because I talked to a lot of
Yeah.
people, clients and other podcast guests who for years deny the voice. That's not what it's saying. That's not what I'm supposed to do, for years. And I think, to your credit, it didn't take that long. And when you listen to it, like you said, listen to that voice when you first start hearing it and take
Yep.
action.
Yeah.
You're going to get to
Without
the
a
good
doubt.
stuff
But you
faster.
are right. I've met people as well who have told me, it took them years to listen. Years of denying, years of saying, "I'm sorry, you must be talking to the
Yeah.
wrong person.
Yeah.
That's not the way I'm going to go." So yeah, for each of us individually,
Right.
it's our
Right.
own
Right.
timetable of how long that struggle ends up going on for.
Absolutely. So if it does take you years to listen, again, it's not about beating yourself up that you didn't listen
Yep.
sooner, because you are where you are now. You can't go back and change anything. So let's move forward from here, from this moment
So the
today.
podcast is called
You mentioned your
The
podcast.
Journey
What's
of My
that?
Mother's
What is
Son.
that called?
For obvious reasons, because what we're doing, is definitely following my mom's footsteps,
Yeah.
and it, it it's a way for me to tell stories of the people that we've met in our travels, and it's very cool because one of the reasons I wanted to podcast. I'd been podcasting for the organization actually since 2012, and I really liked the interaction. I liked having a conversation with someone. It was a different format. It was literally like a 10 to 14, 15-minute conversation. And it could have been with a sponsor for an event we were coming up or anything like that. But as I bought into the idea of moving on and starting a new chapter, I really wanted to continue to tell stories. And one of the things that I thought about was reading through my mom's journals after she'd passed away, and also getting letters from people who she had, in some cases, a very short interaction with, but yet she made an incredible impact on their life. And when they heard she passed, it touched them. So they would reach out to us. And, I thought to myself, man, how cool would have it been, for Mom to have social media and some of the technology that we have today to be able to share her story in real time. And that was one of the reasons why I wanted to be able to do this, to share those stories in real time with the people that we've met. And, it's people that I literally meet face to face, and, we'll connect with them to do a podcast. It's some of my former players that we get to connect with, and we'll do a podcast. Or there's times where I will meet someone virtually, so to speak, do a podcast, and then find out that we're in their area, a few months later, reach out to them and say, hey, let's get together for coffee or lunch or dinner, or just, swing by the campground if you can, or whatever the case is. And it's really neat to be able to connect with those people and to be able to tell those stories, because I really do think that everyone has a story, and that all of those stories can be very inspiring to people. So I love being able to be a platform to help tell those stories. And it's a very wide array of guests, from, life coaches to, like I said, some of my former players to, former professional players, from going back to my sports background. But there's always just, an underlying theme of, having a story that's going to be able to inspire others.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's a lot of the reason why I'm doing this show. And you just mentioned something that I have not talked about yet. So I'm going to make a little bit of a preview, potentially, right here, about traveling around and meeting up with your past podcast guests. So I've been thinking a lot, because I am coming up on episode 100. I believe, if I've done the math right, which is questionable, but July 6th will be publishing of episode 100. And I've been thinking, what could I do to celebrate that? And so I have this idea percolating in the back of my head of going back out on another road trip and maybe visiting some areas and stopping in. All right, I'm not going to show up at anybody's house unannounced, hey, I'm here, can I sleep over? Not like that, but but going out and getting together with some past podcast guests. That would be super fun.
When we came up through Texas, I had the opportunity to meet with 3 of my former guests, and everyone, it was honestly, as if we were friends for life, and that's what I think is so cool. You have a conversation, 30, 40-minute conversation with someone that you record and then you throw out there for the world to listen to, and you feel this real connection with that person, and you stay in contact with them, and then you meet them face to face, and it again, it's affirmation as to, yes, we really did connect. It wasn't something that I just imagined. We really did connect. And you find yourself sitting there at a coffee shop, and 2.5 hours go by, and you're like, oh wow, it's now 3:30. It's time to go.
Yeah. Well, and I think it happens because you're in this recording studio, and even virtually recording studio, like we are. And it's this intimate space, and you're sharing stories and sharing memories and emotions, and there's a bond that happens.
Yeah, we have no exit plan whatsoever.
You're on the road, indefinitely?
I know some people, they start out on this and they'll be like, hey, we're going to do it for 2 years or 3 years or 10 years, whatever it is, and then we'll find our forever home or whatever. We have absolutely no exit plan at this point. We're literally living in the moment, taking it one day at a time, and just enjoying the journey, for once in our lives, enjoying the journey and loving every second of it.
That is so cool. So where have you been that you would recommend people if they were going somewhere? Like where is the place
It's a
that you would
question
recommend that
I
most
get
people
often, and
wouldn't
it is
think of?
so well. It's so tough. It's so
Do
tough to
you? I'm
answer
trying to be
because, man,
original, damn it.
we live in a beautiful, beautiful country, and if I give you five on a list, like,
Yes.
I'll immediately think of five others that are like so cool. So in the past month, I mean, I just
Okay.
finished up a
How
book
about in the
tour, so we
past
did
month?
a lot of Texas, a lot of Louisiana. Lake Charles, Louisiana, is a spot that's actually very special to me and my wife because we've got friends there. They were the friends I visited on that trip on the way back to Dallas, so it's kind of become another home for us. We've actually been there on multiple occasions to help with hurricane relief efforts. Right after Hurricane Laura came through, we'd helped, and we helped with the state park. Um, so Lake Charles is just a beautiful area. Lake Charles, Sulphur, beautiful area. Galveston, Texas, is absolutely beautiful. It's one of our favorites. And then just going back, once you get out to the West Coast, Long Beach, Washington was beautiful. Kentucky blew us away. We just completely exceeded our expectations when we went through Kentucky. We stayed at a really cool state park there, and we stayed at Mammoth
Really?
Cave National Park, and again, just completely exceeded our expectations. Um, you know, uh, and again, it's just so many. And I think the coolest part of this journey is not just the place we've been, but the people we've met. It just goes to show, again, if you sit down and have a conversation with someone, you're going to find
Hmm.
out you have a lot more in common with them than what you don't. And there's so many different cultures in this country. And we live in such a polarized climate. But, like, if we just take five
Yes.
minutes and sit down and have a conversation. And that was one of the cool things about the book signings I was doing. It wasn't so much about selling books and signing books, but I had some real connections with people who would come up, and they might not even bought a book, but we would stand there and talk for 10, 15 minutes. And again, it was a very special time, and hearing their story and them listening to my story,
Hmm.
um, it was very cool. So I think if we all just take time and listen to people, talk to people, and understand their perspective, it would make the world a much better place.
Oh, 100%. And that's what most people
Yep.
deeply, deeply desire is for someone to listen to them. And when we do that, like you said, we have far more in common than we do in difference. It's just a matter of taking the time to sit down and have that conversation. And you don't have to walk away from that conversation agreeing with their point of view. You just come away with an understanding of
Yeah.
how they got to it
Yeah.
and
No, no doubt about it.
why they have
Listening
it.
is such an incredible skill. It really is.
Listening, yeah. And it's funny because people think that storytelling is about you talking. But storytelling is really more about you listening to hear the stories to be able to then retell them or craft them in a different way to then put it out there again. But you have to be very
Yeah.
aware of other characters
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
play
No doubt about it.
of your
Because, I mean,
life to be
even
able to
an
put
interaction
together
like
good
this, and I
stories.
just did a podcast that I had hosted not too long ago where my guest at the end had mentioned to me, she said, this was so much better than the last podcast that I did, because the last podcast, the host gave me like 10 questions, scripted, and I would answer the question and he would not then expand upon it. It would just, he's on to the next question. And I was like, yeah, like I never give guests questions. I don't, and even when I'm on if someone gives me questions ahead of time, I glance at them, but then I kind of put them to the side because I want it to be a conversation. It's not just about, like you said, it's not about me. It's not about you as a host. It's
Yeah.
about collectively, you know, what are we going to come to collectively that other people can listen to and be inspired by? Yeah.
Yeah, that's what all the best interviewers do and have done. You listen to I was going to say podcasts, but Larry King didn't do podcasts. Larry King was doing radio and TV interviews, but the best interviewers are listening and helping.
Yep.
What's the word? I'm like pulling out those stories. I was going to say help developing. They're not developing them. They're pulling them out of people
Right.
by asking those questions. And the only way you can ask the good questions is by listening. So yeah, that's what the good interviewers do. So we'll pat ourselves on the back. So a moment of self appreciation. One of the, people who've listened to the show, they know I do ask that one question at the beginning about your beliefs. That's like a standard go-to because I'm just so curious about how people have been raised. And then the last question of what's your hype song? And that goes back to when I was doing my radio days, and I'm still so into music. So again, curiosity. What's your hype song when you're out on the road and you've been driving for a long time and you're just like, I need some energy.
Like
what do you listen
music
to?
has played such an incredible, part of my life. It's been so, such a big part of it. And it was a tough question for me at first. I really had to think because I think it kind of depends on where I'm at. But my go-to, really right now is Starting Over by Chris Stapleton. Just listening to those lyrics and, with what my wife and I are doing right now and talking about, you can be my lucky penny and I can be your four-leaf clover and, just kind of rolling it out there. It's kind of been, our hype song since we've been on this journey. But I could have went with so many others. Like when I was coaching, on a game day, like Crazy Train was, my big hype song on the way to the ballpark. If we had a big game, like I would make sure I was playing that loudly in the truck as I'm heading to the ballpark. Yeah. So
that definitely sounds like what you were riding
Stapleton
during those days.
Be, I think what our hype song is today for sure.
Excellent choice. So if people want to continue a conversation with you or they want to know where you're going to show up next, maybe that you're going to be in their
best
town
way
or
is go
something,
to my website,
how do they get in
journeymymother's
touch with you, or how do they follow
or
you?
DanClouser.com. If, sometimes Journey My Mother's Son gets to be quite a mouthful, so I make it easy, and also have DanClouser.com. There's both URLs go to the same website, and everything that I have from there is there. So Facebook page, LinkedIn page, Instagram, links to the podcast, a link to email me. And I do love hearing from people. I absolutely love hearing from people, whether it's through email, whether it's through a message on Instagram or Facebook. I enjoyed doing that and connecting. And yeah, if we're in the area, I have no problem connecting with someone I've never met in person before.
Excellent. I will put links to all those places in the show notes, so it'll be really easy. You can just go to the show notes and click on it instead of having to type out journeyofmymotherson.com. And and then
Cool.
People can reach out and follow along as I have been doing on Facebook.
Thanks
Thank you
a lot,
so
Lori.
much
Really
for
enjoyed the
joining me today,
conversation.
Dan, on Fine is a Four-Letter Word.